Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're joined by my brother, Stephen, as we sometimes are. Hello.
Hello.
We've come down to London to see The Brutalist. And on the way down, I was sort of thinking to myself, why are we doing this? Because it's showing in Birmingham. And when the tickets went on sale for the BFI screening in 70mm, you got very excited. You were like, oh, do you want some tickets? And so I just went, yeah, okay. And then, of course, you start regretting it because you're taking 2 days off work to come down here and you hope it's going to be worth it for the 70mm screening. We'll talk about that. So the film is co-written and directed by Brady Corbet or Corbet. The question of the pronunciation of his name has not been resolved. He co-wrote the script with Mona Fastvold. It stars Adrian Brody as a Jewish Hungarian Holocaust survivor who escapes to America in 1947, or in the 1940s, and seeks to make his fortune as best he can, chase the American dream and so on, as an architect, which is what he's trained as, and he has a history of buildings that he's produced in Hungary. And, you know, much more happens to that. We'll get into that. I want to start with you, Stephen, because you were saying that you'd seen Brady Corbet's, if that is his name, other films. So tell us about him. What do you see in him? What are they like? And what similarities do you see between those and this, maybe?
I think I heard about The Brutalist a few years ago because it's been in production for a long time. So the title has been around for a while and the logline of it's been around for a while. And so I've sort of got used to the idea that it's effectively a biography, even though it isn't because it's fictional. And that's sort of what he does. His previous 2 films, he directed a film, I think he wrote and directed on his own, Childhood of a Leader in 2015. So when he was all of 26, 27, and then Vox Lux in 2018. Childhood of a Leader is they're both kind of virtual histories. And he shoots a lot of fake archive material and uses a lot of real archive material. Childhood of a Leader is about the child of a diplomat in France, the diplomat is helping put together the Treaty of Versailles. And the title sort of tells you what the structure of the film is. It's about the child who may well grow up to be a mid-century fascist leader. And Vox Lux is about a child who is a survivor of a school shooting who goes on to become a pop star. The reason I've been looking forward to this is that I think Brady Corbet is interested in a lot of things that I'm also interested in, which is about how fascism and how tyranny comes about and how pain affects people and how trauma affects people. His background originally is as an actor, but not a kind of Macaulay Culkin child actor. He was performing in films for like Michael Haneke and Lars von Trier when he was in his early 20s. I think the first film he was in was 13, the Catherine Hardwicke film. And then just after that, he was in a Greg Araki film about child abuse. And he's clearly very, very well read and watches a huge amount of films. And I think the idea of making a sort of fake history as a way of getting inside a much bigger, inside American history is a really interesting kind of project. And I think The Brutalist is the biggest version of that so far.
Right.
That's why I was interested in it. I think I really like that there is a phrase that William Gass used about a book that he wrote in the 90s, and he used the term the inside of history. And I think making up a fictional history that lives inside real history is a really interesting way of getting at things that a normal biography wouldn't be able to. And I think there's a lot of that in The Brutalist.
It's my film of the year. I think it's absolutely great. And I think part of the reason why I think it's absolutely great has almost nothing to do with what you've said so far, really. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why I think it's so great is, well, it relates a little bit to what you said, Stephen, in the sense that it kind of brings out all the complexities and contradictions of feeling, of feeling that arises out of historical incident, right? That can't be spoken or can only be spoken to some people. And that kind of creates all kinds of separations and discomforting and alienation and outsiderness. Kind of wherever kind of people move socially. I think the way that the film communicates certain things kind of very clearly, whilst only hinting at them, is, one of the things that I think is just so absolutely incredible about this film, right? So, I don't know, do we want to get into spoiler territory?
So yeah, you were getting into spoiler territory.
Yeah, so just to give one example, but bear with me, okay, because it will be long, I think, right? It's the way that rape is used in the film, right? So from the very beginning of the film, yeah, kind of, you get a sense that Sophia, right, there's all the Russian soldiers, and Elizabeth kind of says, oh, they're being very nice or whatever, but you instantly get the feeling that this girl has been raped, and that the reason why she can't speak is because, yeah,
Significant trauma
with a sexual component, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the wife, right? Because that scene in bed where she says, I know you every time. Yeah, kind of, I dreamt of you. Like, I know everything you've done and I forgive it all. And you get the feeling that she's speaking about herself, that something has happened to her that she's got to speak in this way to him, right? And again, it's just kind of, it's unsaid, but it's somehow said, right? Then there's the scene with Guy Pearce's son, right? Where he's with Sophia in the river, right? And he's clearly interested in her, and he's been very vulgar about her before, right? And then all you see is they return from the river, and she's folding.
She's adjusting her skirt.
She's adjusting her coat. And you think, something's happened, right? Yeah. And then, of course...
the most explicit one.
The most explicit one.
In full.
Yeah. Which again has all of these resonances, right? So the film is full of all of these kinds of violations of sex as power, of sex as trauma, sex rape, yeah? And yet, kind of, you get the feeling that in the Adrian Brody case, was it Laszlo?
Todd.
Yeah. Then in Todd's case, it's actually a trauma. Yeah, so he's probably had many traumas we know he had many traumas in Buchenwald, but probably being raped was not one of them. Yeah, and you get a sense that is what this American rapacious kind of capitalist, brings. So that's it, really, yeah? But you can see how these things are hinted at. It's only shown once, the rape. And actually, the most unexpected one, it's kind of this man on this man. But actually, the whole film kind of is full of all of these rapes that are only hinted at, and that if you don't want to see them, I suppose you needn't, right? But that to me were kind of very clear, and of course are woven in through all of the themes of the film, including the most important one, which is the relationship between Elizabeth and Laszlo, right? Which is then revealed at the very last moment. What was this first architectural job about? It was about their experiences of Buchenwald and Dachau.
That's an interesting point that I think we should get back to later on about the epilogue, is that I think the thing that's interesting in the epilogue is that somebody speaks about his work. And I think it's an interesting question of the thread of the film about what it is to be an artist and what artistic expression does with how your internal goings on affects your artistic expression. It's interesting to think about whether or not he means to do that with the building, or whether or not people think of that in retrospect.
For me, it's very clear that it's what he meant. I mean, he might not have been able to articulate it, right? But why else is he putting his whole career, the projects, etc. on the line? Why is he throwing his own money to get those extra inches? Because of what they signify. Yeah. That you look up, and you see freedom. Right.
It's also a huge, and this is a thread that is also appears in Brady Corbet's previous two films. There's a massive kind of what feels like a condemnation of the church built into the building. Completely. And the use of a crucifix comes through the previous two films as well, especially in Vox Lux. But this film is bookended with the upside down Statue of Liberty and then an upside down crucifix at the end. And there is a huge feeling of condemnation and definitely suspicion about what the church, or maybe I guess there are Catholics and Protestants in this, but the relationship between the church and American power structures is something that he is very definitely suspicious of.
Laszlo hates the fact that the church is imposing itself on the project, that it wants this chapel, basically, that he's forced to put in. But he also uses it, because it's this huge brutalist structure, and it's going to look weird and ugly, and no one's used to that. This is a land full of NIMBYs where this is going to be built on top of a hill for everyone to see. And in the town hall meeting, he shows them, although we don't see it at the time, it's only revealed to us later, but he shows them that he's constructed the roof in such a way that at noon, the light shining through will project across, and you just get it. Oh, that's turned them round, right? So Christianity has sold the project as well as kind of tarnished it for him.
A trick of the light has sold the project to a bunch of Protestants. It's an interesting. I mean, the gag of the track at the end of the film. It's this Italian disco track called "One for Me, One for You," and it's like it's absolutely making. If you didn't get it already, it's like it's absolutely nailing in that's not the point of the whole film. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the film is that you spend so long with it that it's not just the fact that you spend so long with it, but it does lots of things at the same time, and it's interested in a kind of diffuse way in lots of different things. That isn't to say that it isn't contained, but it does open up into lots of different areas and different topics. But it ends at a point where what that music does is make it about, it's about the man as the artistic project and the fact that he used this system to sort of sneak in a point that he was making. But it does do it in a way that's kind of odd and off-putting and kind of or jarring, if not off-putting.
You mean the sound of the song? The
sound of the song, but it's also that choice of a track. The choice of a closing track in a film very often is kind of conclusive about what everything was about. And I don't think this is a film that's just about one for me, one for you.
No.
I don't think it's just a film about an artist. I think it becomes more of a film about this relationship between the artist and the patron. But the first half of it is very much about the immigrant and the pain of the trauma he's been through and trying to not assimilate, but get along. And that thread is still there in the
immigrant, the refugee, the exile, the homeless person, right? I mean, I think I forget what words you used at the beginning, but that they emigrated to America or whatever, which to me kind of implies that there were all these options. I mean, I think he ended up in America the same way that he could have ended up in Canada or whatever. He was just part of this refugee package that ended up in New York.
To be fair, he did also say, I mean, I don't remember what I said at the start. I may have said escaped, or I may have said emigrated, whatever. But in terms of America being a target location and whether it was or not, he does say later on, it was our only option, something like that. Like, we came here specifically, in other words.
I think the reason why it was the only option was, because it was literally kind of the only option. He was in this refugee camp, this Truman law made this possible, and that's where he ended up. And actually, through the accident of him meeting this person, the wife was able to come, right? Which would have maybe been also very difficult, if not impossible, without that. So clearly...
You also see just how difficult, and I think this is to the film's credit, it's very, very blueprinted, and it's very, very detailed in some and the effect of that is really, really good. It's very kind of richly designed. You notice that Attila says he's been in the country since before, or Attila's wife says he's been here since before I was born, which has got to be 20, 25 years. And the idea that is probably the only relative that Laszlo had, and it allows him, having managed to survive, to leapfrog to the States. You see just how thin the kind of thread is that allowed people like this to make it anywhere that might give them an opportunity to survive.
The thing that I noted about that line when she says that, it made me think of you and I immediately, because you've been in this country basically as long as I have. I was born in 88 and you came here in about
92.
So since I was 4, you've been here, and you've been an adult for here longer than I have. But she is very much saying he's still an outsider here.
Of course.
And I think, and you and I talk about that all the time.
Sure.
You being in the UK.
I mean, I think for me, like I was kind of on the verge of tears almost, throughout the whole film. And actually, it was because of all of those things that were unsaid and unspoken, but that you knew. I mean, kind of, could you imagine, like, that conversation at the table, with that woman, like, so tell me about the war.
Tell me about the war.
What could you say, right? Kind of.
And it's a beautiful bit of framing in that, because the camera just drifts along. It looks like it's not done out of choice, but the camera drifts along in a way that it puts him in frame with the candles, which so heightens the sense of this is someone who's Jewish. Because there's something about that image that is so very Jewish, and it sets him apart in a really...
In fairness to the woman who asks that, I think it's possible. I'd have to watch that again specifically, but the way she gives that line, it could be so frivolous. It could be such an obvious joke about, tell me about the war, having complete obliviousness to it. And she doesn't quite say it like that, but it's still, how do you answer that question?
I mean, the director, I think, or the direction is brilliant, because it's not judging her. The film is not saying you're a horrible person, how dare you ask this, right? It's like, she just doesn't know, right? And actually, he's not going to be the one to tell her, because it's just too traumatic, right? So I think what the film does is just indicate that gap, that barrier, so it's not judging her, right? But it's making the barrier very evident.
I think it's also showing her question to be a reasonable one. It's a reasonable thing to be curious about. And the fact that she asks it she doesn't even ask it in an indelicate way, but there is no perfectly delicate way to ask that question. And just by asking it, it is obviously kind of an impossible thing to ask, an impossible thing to answer. But the fact that it expresses a genuine curiosity that she has, that isn't, it doesn't come across as like prurient or anything. As you say, it's not judging her for her curiosity.
I mean, I kind of, so now let me not contradict myself, but, bring in the other thing, because I actually think that that's not a question that someone in 1948 would have asked of an American. There was that whole thing. There was a reason why all those men never talked about their experiences of the war. Yeah, it was too traumatic. And they hadn't been in a concentration camp, right? Yeah. So I do think it's a bit indelicate. I don't think the film is judging her, but it is dramatizing it as an indelicate thing. Yeah. Kind of. It's not normal cocktail conversation.
No, for sure.
What did you do in the war? Yeah. I killed people, right? You just don't ask that, right?
I really like the way you've described it as indicating. I think that is something that the film is one of the film's strengths. I might be ambivalent about whether it's a flaw at times, but I think it is a strength of the film that it indicates to an awful lot. It does flag certain things up in a very big, loud way, but I think it's also very skillful at indicating a huge amount more it creates a concrete story that is not always designed to be a metaphor. I think these people really exist, and I believe the trajectory of their relationships with each other. And it indicates a much bigger mid-century history that is made in sort of macro in the relationships between these people.
I think it would be such a mistake to read the film purely on metaphorical grounds, to say it's about America, right? I mean, it diminishes the film. Yeah, I think it does have things to say, about the late 20th century. But I think also it's saying it through these very particular people. And it's saying it in a way that I think is quite sensitive and original. I love that he's a heroin addict in this. I do, because it's kind of, it's not what you expect of an architect, right? And yet, it makes sense that people who've had severe trauma cope with it in various ways, right? Yeah. And, usually you see it through a kind of alcoholism or through a kind of expression of violence, right? So this kind of, numbing, right? That has a kind of logic, because you realize that he's also been a street person, right? Yeah, he's living in shelters, and so I loved that aspect of it. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think it undermines the idea that this is the past and it's a long way gone, because you don't know. Heroin's not a discussion in films of this period.
Yeah,
but seeing that in these, I find the same thing with the kind of. I mean, it's 5 minutes into the film, he's getting a hand job, and you go, I don't see people from this era having sex like this, and it's a really interesting side that, again, you can get from making up a biography rather than taking someone's real life. And there's a whole side to that which is really you don't see in films that are period.
And the film is so beautifully tightly knit, and tightly structured. That moment where he's getting a hand job and he can't get it up, and he's kind of being judged by his friend. And then, the prostitute at the end says, "They want boys," right? Like, how then that ties in, because I think there's also, I don't know if you got this, but I think there was also a suggestion of at least some kind of sexual dimension with both his cousin and with the black man he befriends, right? Yeah, kind of. It's not clear, but at least there's a hint of that, right? Kind of they wake up in bed entwined. Yeah, it could just be the drugs, but there's just something there. And certainly from the cousin towards him, there is a kind of, an interest. So, that scene at the beginning of the film, when you connect it then to the rape, and to Guy Pearce, it actually becomes even more interesting because it's not just binary. It's like an opening up of connections, right?
Yeah, there is something. It's almost as if this exists in the world in which World War II has so shattered the way that everything worldwide was built. It's like everything's been shaken to the point where the pieces are sort of mixed up now, and this exists in a place where it has to kind of be put back together.
Or not necessarily put back together, but that it just shows kind of all those different dimensions that part of the 50s was about closing down the talk of those things. Right?
Yeah, kind of desperate need to like redraw the boundaries, but in a way that doesn't allow things to actually, I don't know, find better, fuller expression. I do think there is something. I agree with you that I do think that the film does invite you to look at it as a film about America, though, and as a metaphor. I don't think it's completely. Part of that, I think, is the film, and part of it, I think, is definitely how it's being promoted, for as much as that needs to be part of the conversation. I think when you do title half your film The Enigma of Arrival, it's not about him, that alludes to the immigrant experience in a bigger way.
I think there is something about that, but again, I just think it would be too reductive to make it only about that, because after all, that kind of arrival in the post-war is a very particular kind. I mean, if you want to say something about the immigrant experience or even of America, right? That doesn't include like indigenous people or Latinos or that kind of reduces the immigrant experience to a Jewish refugee from Buchenwald. I mean, it's kind of, So I think, obviously, it is about America, but it's not just a metaphor because it can't be about, you can't use this person as a metaphor for,
I think it's functioning as a metaphor. The metaphor does work as a byproduct of a story that is focused on two people in a way that is similar to something like There Will Be Blood, which is not about capitalism versus religion. It's about a businessman and somebody that owns a church, and these two particular people. But it brings you to a point that you can read it as being about these things. But I think it totally functions as one contained piece of drama about these particular characters.
There's always in this film, for me, a low-lying irony whenever someone says they don't want us here. Because of the implication, and from the other side, when someone who doesn't want them here says the same thing, because there's this implicit, we are the people who are here and you are the immigrant. But of course, everyone we see in this film is an immigrant to America at some point. As you were saying, the Native Americans are the only ones who have been there from the start. And there's this thing of, who gets to decide, who gets to call themselves the indigenous, and who.
I think when the character is saying that, he really is saying, we were rats and animals in Germany and we're rats and animals here, right? So it's not just about that's his thinking about the way he's being treated. And actually it has to do with Jewishness.
Yes, right? It's not just immigrant, it's Jewishness in particular. Yeah.
And it's in a period where anti-Semitism was really entrenched. Yeah, you couldn't join certain golf clubs and you couldn't go, Harvard had Jew quotas until the early 60s, right? Like actively, right? So, and we're talking here about 48, 49. So that kind of, actually, it's the historicizing of the Holocaust that began to shame people into dealing with anti-Semitism, right? But you're just at that moment of change, where you can argue, that there's a reversal of that now, but definitely in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust, right, there was a kind of a rethinking, I think, driven by shame around questions of anti-Semitism that nonetheless took a good 20 years to work their way through the system, right? Like major American universities were still unapologetic about having Jew quotas, right? So I think that's the type of experience that I think that the film is talking about. But it's a very particular type of American experience. Yeah.
It's lovely to see how that one scene around the dinner table is blocked, as well as how it works in dialogue, because there is a wide shot of the Jewish side of the table, basically, where you've got Laszlo and then the lawyer's wife,
Yes,
and then the lawyer who he is born Jewish and she converted to Judaism. And then you have in the middle is obviously at the head of the table is Van Buren, and then on the opposite side his two very waspish looking kids, both of whom have this sort of suspicious, uncomfortable look on their face, as if it's hard to tell whether or not that's discomfort about the whole topic of the war or whether or not it's suspicion about anybody that's Jewish. And it's lovely seeing how that plays out. And Van Buren in the middle is just, I'm just here to encourage conversation. And, it'd be lovely if these people could help you out. It's as if he has no real sense of quite what people have gone through in the war. And it's also, there's a whole thread there about, he made his money in wartime manufacturing for ships, and the whole question of what he's doing, taking in and sort of owning this pet foreign architect, and the question of guilt there about what he might have done during the war, or being somebody who may have some influence. He knows somebody whose office works for the vice president, and the whole question of how long it took America to get involved in the war, and the whole question of American guilt about 1939 to 1945 is threaded through the whole thing. But again, as you say, it indicates towards this rather than making any overt point about it. He doesn't drink a lot one night and in tears apologize to Laszlo for, oh my God, I could have done so much more. It just suggests these things through
I think the
well-designed
film
characters.
frames it through the very beginning, because what happens at the very beginning? He goes visit his cousin. What are you told about his cousin? He's changed his name. Yeah, he's converted to being a Catholic. Why is that? Because he loves Catholics, or because no, it's because it's good business. Why is it good business? Because there's so much fucking anti-Semitism. Yes, that you've got to change your name to do business. So I think the film frames that, from the very beginning. I mean, I think the whole point of the character, of the cousin character, is to, well, not the whole point, but a large part of the function of that character is to set those grounds.
It's really interesting that he's not only made up an anglicized or an English or American first name, but he set up Miller and Sons.
Yeah.
And there's a lovely thing about, obviously what happened during the Holocaust is that entire bloodlines are just ended. A history is ended. And what he's done is move to America and make up a history. So there's a lovely kind of irony in that.
Actually, I'm not sure about that. So I'm not sure that, well, he obviously moved to America, but the question is, I got the feeling that he moved there before the war.
Oh yeah, he did. Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
He
like
moved
20
there
odd
in,
years.
the late 20s, early 30s. Yeah.
So the whole Holocaust thing, I mean, he's as much of a barrier understanding as the other Americans, but his function there, through this kind of assimilation, which is not assimilation is the wrong word, because actually he really is just covering up his Jewishness. Yeah, it's not like other kinds of assimilation. Yeah, points to the prevalence of anti-Semitism, his vulnerability to it. Him kicking Laszlo out is part of him feeling vulnerable to the kinds of
to his
attention.
wife, who still at one point does make a joke about, he still sounds like no American I've ever met.
Yeah,
there's
I was
still
gonna
something
point out
in there that doesn't
the change in his
let him
accent,
be-
because he has essentially an American accent,
Yeah.
or sound to most people's ear like an American accent. And the question of, did that develop or is it put on and practiced, is not answered. But she says you can still tell. And whether and there's no, I love a line that is kind of said with sort of obliviousness that points to something deeper, which I think that line is. She's not making a point when she says that. She's just kind of blithely saying you can still tell, but it speaks to so much about the culture of someone coming there and not being able to fully escape the telltale signs of being an immigrant.
It's also great that the film is structured, uses the war or the Holocaust or both as a sort of structuring absence by starting. And it's similar to other films it's also an interesting film because I find myself thinking about all sorts of other things that are deliberately or not referenced in it. And it starts very similarly to The Master, the Paul Thomas Anderson film, which is that it starts on a boat in the immediate aftermath of the war. You don't see anything from the war. Actually, no, it does begin with that moment with Zofia, which is after the war. But it shows you nothing of the war, but we all, from the very beginning, that is something that is hanging over the whole thing. I mean, I think it's actually great how I really like how the sequence on the boat earlier on, that very kind of Son of Saul sequence where you're over his shoulder, which is a lovely way of saying there are hundreds and thousands of these stories and we're picking out this one from any number of silhouettes in the darkness. I love that has this feeling of, it has the sound and the feeling of being in a concentration camp. Then it opens up into light and escape.
I thought that was quite deliberate, right? Because my first impression is he's on a cattle train to Auschwitz or something, right? I think that's kind of what you're meant to be evoke. And then the film cheats slightly. He's on a boat to America. But actually, that's also interesting. The boat to America is made to feel like...
And it does give you this very kind of, this quite... not even on the nose, because I think it's getting at something much bigger, but with a real, like, brutal technique of going... It's like flipping the US flag upside down. It says, here's the Statue of Liberty. It's upside down. So we're getting at something which is very skeptical about the idea of coming to the land of freedom. It's very similar to, there's a... have you seen The Immigrant, the James Gray film?
No.
Which starts with a shot of... It's funny because there are sort of three Statue of Liberty shots now, which all sort of sit next to each other, because obviously there's the end of the opening of Godfather Part 2, which has the Statue of Liberty reflected in the window that the young Marlon Brando is in quarantine in. And then The Immigrant in the middle starts off with the back of the Statue of Liberty. And it's a lovely thing because I've never thought about, from Ellis Island, what is actually your view of the Statue of Liberty? The Statue of Liberty points towards Manhattan, I think, not towards Ellis Island, where the boats drop you off. Or at least that's the indication that's given from the way that film starts. But it's a great move. It's a great way to open the film. And it's so claustrophobic and so overwhelming with that sound. And you're trying to read this letter and you're trying to figure out where you are in this space. And then it just explodes with him getting out. And just the look on his face when you first see him and just how like staggered he is to be there is a really lovely, quite moving moment.
I think it is pointing out towards sort of...
It is pointing outwards.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, that is the idea of it, isn't it, really?
Then I stand corrected.
I think so, yeah.
I love the way that concentration camp America is linked in those opening shots. Because then that's also what the film returns to at the end. Yeah, this building, which is, financed by American capitalism and at the top of this hill in this town, is kind of bringing Buchenwald and Dachau into Pennsylvania, right? That is
with a huge crucifix at the top, but a crucifix in absence.
Yes,
which is kind of it's something that again you could sort of read endlessly about whether or not it's accusing the church, but it's also kind of suggesting that it's not even there. It's a crucifix that's made by
the crucifix is empty.
Yeah,
seems to say.
What do you make of the fact that the film actually, the very beginning and the very end, are Zofia in that cell or wherever she's being held, where she's being interrogated or she's being asked about who she related to? Because that's the very, very, very end of the film is actually her. What do you make of that?
What was the very, very end? Remind me.
It dissolved back to her sitting in the room that she was led into at the very beginning, which I guess is the Hungarian authorities interrogating her or trying to find out whether she's connected. To me, it sounds like
the Russian army.
The Russian army, that's it. You're right.
Which were famous for raping as a form of control and revenge. Really, in the immediate post-war. The way that I read it, because it's an unrecognizable adult Sophia speaking about her uncle, but who has a daughter who is played by the same actress as the Sophia, who has clearly been brutalized to speechlessness at the beginning of the film, and then who's obviously just, a pretty lovely young woman who hasn't experienced any of that. So I thought kind of, those two images is what it brings to mind for me. Yeah. It's
another huge, bold move that he likes to do. It's all three of his films have double casting like that. There's Robert Pattinson plays two parts in Childhood of a Leader, in a way that's very, very effective. And then in Vox Lux, Raffi Cassidy, who plays Zofia in this, is basically, it's sort of presented as a Natalie Portman film, but Natalie Portman's only in half of it. Raffi Cassidy plays the young Natalie Portman for the first hour, and then she plays Natalie Portman's daughter for the second hour. It's sort of, in all three cases, I found it kind of confusing for 30 seconds. And then I go, oh, that's just a really, really strong, quite jarring move to make. But I think the effect of it is actually quite, it's interesting. I mean, it's very much an intellectual move rather than a feeling move, but I quite like it.
I mean, I really, at this moment, I'm thinking it's a great film. And it's almost like the more you talk about it, the greater it becomes because you make connections that, you're maybe unconsciously making whilst watching it, right? But kind of that then in talking about it, you're articulating and they seem even more magnificent, really. We haven't talked about the Guy Pearce.
Well, I wanted to sort of mention, and Guy Pearce comes into this, the kind of the moment-to-moment experience of watching the film for me was the first half, which is 100 minutes long. As you mentioned, the film is really long. It's 215 minutes. The first half before the intermission is 100, so the rest is 115. The first half is so full of energy and kind of...
Whizzes.
Yeah, it whizzes by. Music, I think, is used really well to keep tempo up a lot of it. And I think the score's really good. But part of it as well is... There's just kind of this possibility. Things are kind of electric. I mean, it's not like perfectly happy and everything. The guy's escaped from the Holocaust. His wife isn't with him. There's all this stuff going on. But there's also kind of opportunity kind of crackling in the end. There's that thing, that's so great early on where he talks the library job from $1,000 up to $2,000 immediately. And you go, oh yeah, it makes sense. And then when they get back at home, he's like, I was going to settle at $450, but this guy talked it up, you get this sense of energy and everything. And Guy Pearce is a huge part of that because when he shows up, he's this wonderful fiery ball of anger initially because he's so pissed off about this renovation he wasn't told about, and then when he settles down and he starts to ingratiate himself, he's just so fucking funny in every scene. He's an absolute stitch. He's clearly meant to be, and I think the fact that we were laughing maybe encouraged others to. I get the feeling it might have been a bit of a stuffy audience had it not been for us going, no, this guy's really funny, come on guys, but we found him really funny. And
not as a gag though. He's very believable and very real, but he is really funny.
He's a lot of kind of sort of mid-Atlantic uber capitalist bluster about him, and he's essentially quite ignorant about all the things that he admires or tries to thinks he admires in Laszlo. The artistry and the creativity, and he wants to associate himself with that, and it feels quite genuine that he wants to, but he doesn't really know what he's talking about or how to do it. And it's quite funny to see someone who's slightly oblivious in that way. He's also obviously a really powerful figure, and there's something to kind of be worried about with him. As you were saying, it's obvious from the start that he's racist, because Laszlo brings in the black guy who he's kind of roomed with.
Gordon.
Gordon.
Isaac the Bankole.
Right, to work with him. And, he's the first person he sees when he shows up and he goes, there's this bloody Negro here. Mm-hmm. So it's like, so you get it from the start. And you do, I guess you maybe kind of keep it in the back of your head that at some point, if he turns, as, ultimately he does, Laszlo's Jewishness is going to become something that he'll activate his racism about him.
Well, it's his kind of hollowness. It's the thing that makes him funny in a way that you don't have any reason to think really is... Well, you do have reason to think it if you think about it for a couple of minutes, but the thing that makes him funny in a kind of harmless way for the first half is exactly what makes him so dangerous and unsettling in the second half. Mm. I really love the scene in the car where he's driving... This is in the second half. He's driving Erzsébet and Zofia to Philadelphia, and I actually feel quite warmly towards him because I think he's a little bit pitiable and he's a little bit sad. And I think he genuinely wants to feel things, but he has this absolutely hollow center that makes him really dangerous when he's pushed and when things when things are actually at stake for him. So this project that's in tribute to his mother is all great, and like Laszlo is absolutely taking advantage of the fact that he can play this guy for money. He absolutely is. You see that activate when they have a conversation in the first half of the film. But as soon as that train crashes and people are really at stake here, he doesn't know how to manage this because he can't quite deal with how real these things are. There is a sort of... I don't think the film is making this point deliberately, but there is something Trump-like about him, which is that this is somebody that has a very designed outside, but there is nothing going on underneath it, and that makes him really unsettling.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think the film makes very clear that he's a really repressed homosexual. Really.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Empty is an unfair way of putting it.
The whole thing with the mother,
Yeah.
right, and the descriptions of the other, bits of the family, and he is an illegitimate son as well, right? That's kind of also made very clear. So I think there's all other kinds of stuff going on there, as well as a kind of a rapacious capitalism and playing people up against each other. I think, and I don't know whether I'm thinking this too far, but there is also, to me, a suggestion of incest.
Yes.
Yeah. With the son.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, that whole chasing after him, where's father, dad, and then he calls him by his first name, right? Like, kind of, So I think you get kind of more, like, he's not a hollow character. He's a character who's given
No,
all
I agree.
kinds of...
Perhaps what I'm getting at, that's the wrong way of putting it. I think it's that I don't think he's hollow as a character, but I think there is something that is very, very, like, terribly badly integrated in him as a human being.
Sure.
That's a much better way of putting it. It's not that he's empty, it's that he is not connected to what is actually going on inside of him. I mean, you see him the whole time that we know him, apart from that first scene, he's existing in the wake of his mother's death, which is, again, a kind of interesting structuring absence for him. Is his mother's died, and everything that's happening afterwards is him trying to get this building put together that is in tribute to her, and whatever that relationship is between the two of them that was is the central relationship of his life.
It's like a psycho house on the hill thing, because it is literally
kind of,
on the hill.
Yeah.
It's funny. I did think Trump. I thought this is going to be such an obvious kind of reference point. Does it actually hold up? And I thought no. And I think the thing about him aspiring to kind of understanding art and creativity is something that you do not see in Trump at all.
Absolutely.
I saw Trump Jr. in his son, or not just Trump Jr., but the various Trump Juniors. That feeling of, I love you, Dad. I want to be you. I want to be like you, and I want you to like me, and all that stuff. That cravenness, and being kind of even worse than their dad in some ways. I see very much in the real Trump children, and I see it in this kid here. But I think the comparison between Trump Senior and Van Buren, I don't think really holds up. It's a really vague one.
Yeah. Also, but there is something about Van Buren. His interest in art and beauty and so on, you get the sense that is really sincere, right? He wants it. He knows he can't make it, or he's not. Yeah. And actually, the thing about the buying of Laszlo and the raping of Laszlo partly has to do with possessing that which he doesn't have, right? And partly also kind of thinking he's got a right to deal with vermin in whatever ways he
well, that's what's such a sort of awful thing about that scene is he is demolishing this guy as a being verbally, while desperately trying to get inside him. It's like it's such a horrible scene to sit through.
I thought it was
in a very good way.
He really doesn't understand art, though, even though he might want to. Because what makes him, I think, come back to Laszlo is the fact that other people have recognised this architecture and it's got into a magazine. And so he's tying himself to something that he understands other people see as this great achievement. And he would like to get it maybe, but he doesn't have any eye for that or any sympathy for that. It's that he recognises this is something people think is great, and maybe he sees opportunity there too. In a way. I mean, he presents Laszlo with the opportunity to see opportunity, as it were. But I think he also, he sees opportunity himself as, I could get more or whatever.
There's something I really like in that scene, in the cafe where he goes and finds Laszlo again and presents him with the pictures and they're talking about just how upset he was when he came and saw the library. And Laszlo has this kind of interesting, arrogant line about, you were seeing something that you weren't expecting. And it's almost like he's saying you were seeing something that's kind of radical, artistically speaking. It's understandable that you wouldn't be able to sort of keep up in the moment. And I do like that Laszlo is a really interesting character in that he's not just a great guy and somebody that, a perfect victim of historical circumstance. Like, he's got foibles and he's kind of selfish. And I like the fact that I think there are reviews that are out about the film that describe him as a genius architect. And I didn't once think of him as a genius architect.
No.
I think he's just a working architect, and he's got his taste and he's determined. It's not axiomatic in the film that he's brilliant.
No.
Well, I think you need to see him as brilliant, right? Yeah. So, and so I'm not disagreeing with you, but just that conversation that you're pointing to, someone who lives through the Nazi period. What was the Nazi term for that art that they destroyed? Degenerate. He was an example of degenerate art, right? He's amazed that his buildings still exist because they're too modern. They're degenerate art. Yeah, he would have expected the Nazis to have demolished those buildings, right? So that conversation of that he's not surprised that the guy doesn't understand, I'm sure there's at least 10 years of experience with that, right?
But the question of him being seen as a great genius, I suppose it depends on what we're talking about when we say that, because I would say if you think about Megalopolis and the way that Adam Driver's character is presented, that really is a kind of unparalleled polymath great genius. Okay. And that's not what we see here. But he's an accomplished and renowned architect.
Yeah, I mean, you have to see him as let's not throw the word genius kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
But I think you are meant to see him as an exceptional and uniquely visionary type of architect.
Yeah.
That's why he's got all the coverage. That's kind of why the magazines want him. That's why there's a fucking retrospective of all his work at the end of the film. And he's contrasted to the guy who just builds warehouses.
Yes.
Well, I think that's an interesting one. I think that's where, I think you're right. I don't disagree with you. You have to see him as somewhat exceptional, but it is careful writing that still has him be someone that's designing a bowling alley while he's shoveling coal. Sure. He isn't just Bob, the guy that builds shopping malls, but he is somebody that will get by when he needs to, designing a bowling alley, which is not the most. It's more corporate than some of his other purely artistic work.
Yes. Well, the thing is, people will do what they need to do to survive, but you are meant to think that his level of talent and skills is at a worldwide level of a handful of people.
Right. Although he also, I think it's partly in the way he carries himself, because he doesn't carry himself with a kind of, my genius is not being recognised. He's getting on with his life and doing what he can. And when he says, I'm doing a bowling alley, he says it with a certain degree of shame.
Sure.
But he doesn't carry the kind of, that kind of self-possession or around other people.
But what else? I mean, so to me, that's perfectly, absolutely consistent with...
I'm not saying it's inconsistent. I'm saying I just think it's an interesting part of the character. You might see it played differently in a different, by someone else.
But I think it's important. So, I mean, he's someone who's been made to wear a yellow star probably for 10 years, right? So it's kind of not modesty.
No.
Yeah, kind of. You've been treated like a rat for 10 years, like a non-human being for 10 years. So kind of, you're not expecting a Gary Cooper Rourke moment, right? Like, kind of, he has a history that someone like Gary Cooper in The Fountainhead does not, right? So it's not just a personality trait. It's a personality trait built on historical experience.
That is one of the things that is kind of interesting, though. It's like, this isn't a film that's about Bob, the guy that builds shopping malls. But going back to what you just said, it could well be the case that there might be a film that branches off from this, which is that for the first 20 years of his career, Bob was designing shopping centres. And then he worked up the ladder in a much more sort of tepid way than what Laszlo's doing, to building great buildings in New York that are thought of, as artistic masterpieces. And I think I really agree with what you're saying about, I think the resolve that Laszlo has, it's indicated that potentially that's related to feeling like I've been treated like absolute shit for a certain amount of time, and this strengthens my resolve to, when I take an opportunity, when I manage to get an opportunity after being on the edge of oblivion for 10, 15 years, I'm not giving this up to anybody. Bob coming in to give his opinion on this can get fucked, because I'm in charge of this. I put this together. I'm the one that talked managed to get Van Buren into giving me this commission. There's no way I'm not taking this as the opportunity.
I think the more I think about it, the more... So the film gives you this information, right? He was born in 1911, right? Which means kind of in 1931, he was 20, right? Kind of when would he have been sent to the camps? 42, maybe 43, if he survived, at the end. So, and yet he's somebody who's designed all these iconic buildings, including the municipal library in Budapest, you're told.
Yeah, true.
I mean, you don't build a municipal library in a major capital if you're just, a run-of-the-mill architect, right? And so, of course, and then what happens is, presumably his career got completely stalled, right, by 1938, 39, right? And then kind of you have a 10-year gap between, building iconic buildings and then what? Kind of working in a bowling alley or designing a bowling alley or designing furniture. So, and I think it's beautiful of the film that it gives you all the information that you could link it up in all of these ways, right?
You can see the guy, he's at a job interview and the guy's going, can you explain this 10-year gap? The Nazis came. I just briefly, because I knew he would obviously turn out to be an architect or be building this building, but I was actually not sure at the start whether he was or not, because when he's with the Alessandro Nivola character, his cousin, and his cousin introduces him as this is the architect, and he's a certified architect. Because Nivola is, as we've said, he's on the make and he changed his name for good business and everything. I initially thought, is he an architect or is he winging it? And are they building something together? Obviously, then it turns out it's certainly clarified when we see the photos that Guy Pearce brings him of his previous buildings, and he kind of breaks down because they're still there and everything. That he's obviously got this genuine history as an architect, but I don't know. I think it's a possibility. I don't know whether the film is doing it deliberately to raise that possibility in mind, but it was a possibility for me. I wonder whether this is an element that I hadn't considered.
I think what you're meant to think, or one of the things you're meant to think, is that the cousin has no idea who he is. Yeah, so, kind of a well-known architect who built the library in Budapest. Yeah, but, and obviously very pleased with the way the library turned out, but also quite ready to check him out afterwards. So I think, I think the cousin has a half-baked idea of who he is as an architect.
Well, who amongst us really knows anything about our cousins? I know their first names, but what else? But what
would
do
you
they
take them in if they were in a refugee?
For a bit, if they could build me a library, I suppose. So earlier I mentioned, my kind of moment-to-moment experience watching the film and how the first half is full of energy. The second half I felt was a lot slower, and I guess in plot terms you would expect, kind of things to turn sour in some ways, and obviously they do here. But I did think it lulled to an extent. I think
it definitely did not feel as sprightly as the first half. Though again, I just felt the time flew by. Actually, I kind of and I stayed in the cinema through the intermission. I didn't look at my watch once. Kind of the length was not an issue for me. I think the second half feels a bit slower. Yeah, because it also goes a lot darker. Yeah.
I think it's also built differently. The filmmaking is different in the second half to the first half. And again, that's something which I have a lot of... He's more than willing to talk about what he's doing at great length, which is kind of an interesting thing with Brady Corbet. He's not somebody that keeps quiet about what he's doing, which can make him somebody really interesting to listen to. It can also make him feel like somebody that's trying to impress you. But also when the work is impressive, I kind of don't mind. But the way that the film is designed is different in the second half. The first half is very kind of modernist and very linear, and it's very much Laszlo's point of view. The second half, I'm particularly bearing this in mind, I saw this 2 months ago, and so I knew what the whole shape of it was. So I'm seeing it for the second time today. The second half, it felt very deliberate that it started with. It really lingered on certain shots of Zofia, and it's like knowing that she's the person that tells his story at the film's end. It felt like, is this doing a little bit more with an external, slightly more biographer's point of view? It's doing some of that, but it's still very much subjective to Laszlo. But that subjectivity becomes kind of complicated and kind of disturbed. There's lots of jump cuts. There's lots of I don't know how to describe it. Things like jump cuts are designed to, and there are sequences also that it's not quite as linear as the first half, and it's kind of disrupted, and there are more jumps through time in a way that it's as if it's like the first half exists in a calm, digestible, linear way, and the second half kind of mixes it up, and it's as if he's not quite centered anymore, which is an interesting thing considering that it's when his wife comes into play, and now there's a real struggle to make these two lives work together.
I mean, I think for me, so the whole first half of the film, you could argue, is also about bringing the wife over, right? And then kind of the second part of the film is about the couple. It's about what the couple has suffered for in Europe before. Yeah, kind of what they're suffering kind of in America. Right, like, yeah, and actually, I think we haven't talked about that before. But for me, the film is also a kind of, a love story, really. Yeah, kind of their relationship, is central. They both survived, like, this trauma, right, kind of previously. They were separated. They're now reunited. They have a different kind of trauma, kind of in America. And actually, I'm not clear what happens to Elizabeth in the film after. I just can't remember at the moment. Like, so she goes, she confronts them. She's thrown on the floor. The daughter helps her.
Well, that's the last we see of her. I think isn't she dead by the time we get to the epilogue?
The epilogue, yeah.
Yeah.
So they relocate to Israel. Well, she suggests we should go when she's in hospital having the overdose. She says, "I think that's it. We have to go. It's rotten here." And so they relocate to Israel, and she dies between then and 1980 when the
was that made
Biennale is.
Really clear? Because I missed
think
detail.
during the speech she mentions that.
That's not clear to me because so it's clear that she wants to go to Israel and she wants to be a grandmother, and so on. And then in the epilogue, you definitely get the sense that she was, right?
But whether there's dialogue that we missed that clarifies, I don't know.
I think there is. It's a very long speech, but I think there is.
I think, maybe. I mean, my question is him. Yeah. Did he go back to Israel?
Yeah, I think it explicitly says that he did. I think so.
Okay, that's interesting.
Well, the Israel thread is something that we could get onto. Sorry, but you're going to pause.
I'm just going to pause this sec to save it because I'm terrified I'm going to lose.
Okay. Is there more coffee while you're stopping?
Okay, so just like the Brutalist, we're doing this in two parts. We've paused. We've had an intermission for another cup of tea. Let's get on to Israel then. It's a large component in the
complex
film.
Topic.
It's a large component in the film, as we were just mentioning, of some people's motivations. Obviously, the film begins in 1947, which is close to when Israel started. And we hear news reports, don't we, about the British Mandate ending and Israel being created. Is it a news statement or is it a speech given by the news-ready government, something like that? But we do hear it, Eretz Yisrael and all that. And then we have the niece character and her partner, Benjamin, wanting to move there, and that becomes this sticking point between them and the couple, the main couple. But then the Felicity Jones character also wants to move, as you were mentioning. So, talk about Israel.
Who wants to start? One of the things that's it's funny because, as I say, having seen this a couple of months ago and being very active in reading all the discourse around it, people are not discussing very much about the Israel part of it. It's also interesting that I think Corbett and Mona Fastvold have said that this is the script that they wrote 7 years ago and it hasn't changed, which makes it kind of interesting in that it's obviously coming out now during the war in Gaza, the genocide, however we want to describe it. I think one of the things that's really interesting and kind of challenging about the Israel stuff is that it just presents that scene between the Tots and Zofia and Benjamin as this is something we're going to do. And I think obviously no mention is made of Palestinians that have been displaced, which is a context that you absolutely bring to it now. And I think there's an interesting, not deliberate, but kind of provocation there to think about Is this something that, being in the kind of situation that these people have been in, surviving the kind of persecution that they've survived, is it something that you would not know about, or something that wouldn't even occur to you, or something that wouldn't bother you? Partly I'm on really shaky ground here because my knowledge of the history is very, very limited. So the question of how well known it would have been that Palestinians had been moved on in order to make space for Jews to move into the state of Israel is something I don't know very much about.
I think depending on how from you are, sort of affects, even at the time, affects the way you see it. Because if you're particularly observant, then it's your homeland, right? That's how you see it, and it's your. I mean, not only is it your right to go, it's your obligation to. That's what Zofia. That's what she says, right? We have an obligation to go there. It's our duty. So, the question of whoever's been moved out to make space for us wouldn't be relevant to her. I mean, they shouldn't be there in the first place, maybe. But it's not. It's not something that's said. It's just we should go there. This is our space.
I find it problematic in the sense that, can you imagine? So I completely understand a kind of Zionism, in the immediate post-war, right? These people have been persecuted, pogromed out of different countries, like kind of, after killing 6 million, there's almost like a worldwide obligation to create a safe space, right? But of course, that safe space definitely comes at a cost, and people are aware. I mean, kind of, there's a line in the film saying something like, we hope everybody participates or contributes, or I forget what the word is. Falls in line on this, to kind of make it possible. So I think that's one thing. I think the thing about Sophia saying we have an obligation, it's also completely understandable, right? Kind of, you're building a state, you need people, to populate it, right? If people don't go, then that what is conceived of as a safe space can't exist, right? But on the other hand, the irony of displacing people so they can feel safe is one of the things that I think the film actively works with. I mean, I think that's the function of the black character in the film.
How do you mean?
Well, it's a film that initially, when they're down and out, there's an equality, but then, kind of, as soon as, what's his name, Laszlo, he's got the power at a certain point to fire, at will, treat him like shit, right? And actually, I think that kind of, so the function is to speak of these hierarchies, I think, and how kind of a Jew, however oppressed he is in America in 1947, still has a lot of power over a black person.
It's funny, actually, that thing I mentioned before about how Laszlo holds himself, the kind of pride that he might hold himself with, would be greater if another filmmaker made it. He doesn't seem to. There is that moment where they're on the crane early on, and he says something like, "I won't be seen in a certain way." I forget exactly what the thing is, but it's like,
He won't let his family see him as
a beggar.
I won't let the people back home see me as a beggar. And Gordon's response, he doesn't say anything, and he doesn't even. Laszlo doesn't even see his response. It's for the camera. But he just kind of, it's like a chuckle, a raise of an eyebrow, like, oh yeah, sure, your people are back at home. Like you don't know what it's really like, or it's not the same for me. It has that feeling to it, right? Like he has his knowing response to it.
Another, just, something I want to say just before I forget, but one of the moments that hit me and that was completely extra textual was that moment where they go to Italy and he meets his old friend, and they kiss each other, right? Kind of just with like real affection and, surprise and relief or whatever. Like, they survived. And actually, I was watching the news yesterday of those people returning to Palestine, and the men were kissing themselves in the same way. It's like they're always kind of smelling each other to kind of feel and touch and reassure themselves that it was really, So that moment in the quarry kind of brought that up for me.
I want to shift topic a little bit again, just because I'm glad that these two bits have come up at the same time. The crane sequence and the quarry sequence, just to talk about how great. There are just sequences in this that are just really beautifully put together, and they look stunning. The first shot of that crane is just an absolutely stunning looking shot. And then the sequence walking with them across the top of it, and that song that they sing to each other as Laszlo is sort of tying that rope around the waist of Gordon to keep him safe as he goes out to do whatever he's going to do. And the quarry sequence are just like stunning just to be in for a few minutes.
The quarry sequence is
that kind of dreamy quality that it has. That's something that I really identify with the second half of the film, and the sort of disturbed mood. Exactly. That quality that it has, where you're hearing this guy who was obviously an anti-fascist and fighting during the war, and he's talking about crushing all of these fascists with marble, which links really beautifully to whatever it is that happens to Van Buren at the end. And just the way that it sounds in that place, it's somehow really, really wide open, but it's kind of underwater and kind of dreamy. And as Van Buren goes, it's all different shades of soft white. And it all seems to build towards this moment of Van Buren listening to the marble. And you really think, I do think there's something genuine that is feeling something here, or knows that there is something that can be felt here, but I'm never going to know what's inside this guy's head and whether or not he is a pure sociopath. But I just think, just to look at and to listen to, those are two really great sequences.
The beginning of the quarry sequence to me looked like a cubist painting, right? Like, it was it really was abstract. And the cutting, which kind of emphasized, like going from one place to another, did that as well, right? So it was just really beautiful to see. And then that moment where the water transforms, kind of the marble, which kind of also rhymes with the light, falling, revealing something else. I thought that was just really beautiful. But really, just the body language between the two survivors of a war, which Van Buren is completely immune and alien. He has no idea. Like, he's just thinking this guy's late.
Yeah,
right.
All they're doing is just making us late.
Yeah.
That whole quarry sequence leads to the rape. That's where it happens. And there is absolutely it's power. It's a power thing, that rape. And I think it has to happen there and in this kind of milieu, because it's a reassertion of power in a situation where he feels he has little, or has a lot less than he's used to, because he's such an outsider here. In the party, he's stood above on that balcony watching. He doesn't get it. He's not part of it. And what you're saying about the quarry thing, like, that's as close as he can get to understanding the way these people think and the way they feel and what they get out of what they're doing.
It's also just a very direct link between, there is obviously the rape of one character to another, but that quarry looking the way that it is it's making a very bold and like obvious link to, this is rape of the land. The way that you see those mountains become cubes, because it's being eaten away at by people, and that sequence ends as they leave. That shot, it's as Van Buren is telling Laszlo, like, you've got 4 hours on the train to just run. He's gaslighting him about what happened the night before, and the shot that ends is on this marble wall with this sort of doorway carved out of it, and it's like, it seems to be that it's very much about, this is an entire sequence that is about a sort of an earth scale rape of the land by people like Van Buren, who just want to take something that they can have as a trophy for themselves elsewhere. And obviously the person to person rape that happens between the two of them.
Yeah, but I think the rape is not just, it's multifaceted, isn't it? But it's not just I want something, but it's I hate what it is. I hate what you are.
Yeah.
I mean, he has dialogue. I can't remember what the lines are, but they're of that type. I hate what you are, basically. You people, and he goes back to calling him like a rat or scum or something like that.
Which speaks exactly to, I think, the repression that you pointed out about him early on. It's like, I absolutely need this thing and I have to possess it. But I loathe it at the same time. And he's completely unstable internally.
But I think we're missing something, and I can't quite put my finger. Why, at that moment, does Laszlo take heroin? Yeah, what happens? Yeah, so he goes to Italy. The wife doesn't want him to go to Italy. There's the dance sequence. A woman comes on to him. There's that song. He's kind of interested in her, but then leaves. Yeah, and then he does the heroin. Yeah, why the heroin at that moment? What can't he cope with that leads him to heroin at that moment? That I couldn't quite put my finger on.
That's a good question, to which I don't have an answer.
Yeah, there's maybe just a feeling of a situation that he needs to escape from, and heroin does represent an escape. It's a change of your brain states in a
Or if you want to be
significant
really ungenerous, the plot needs him to be immobilized enough, and we know enough that he takes heroin, so let's just do that. That's really ungenerous.
But I know what you mean. You have to bring a little something to it, but I think you have to bring a little something to love it. Although I think it is interesting that so much of the film that actually is willing to explain itself. Like I wondered, for example, whether the wife knew about the rape. When she actually kind of intimates that she does, but it's not clear when she's speaking to him. She talks about do you remember what you confessed to me? And that's when she says it's rotten. So you're like, okay, she must. But then the film will clarify for you in the following scene when she confronts Guy Pearce and says, "You are a rapist." You go, okay, so it's willing to make things absolutely clear if it feels it might need to, or if there's dramatic sort of value in doing so, which I really appreciate. Because there are things that it still will just leave up to, like the thing we were saying about the niece adjusting her skirt. It's an implication, and it's not absolutely clear, but it's there for us to interpret. It won't clarify that, but there are things that it will.
I think it's interesting. I think the film's interesting in that regard as something that feels like where you can find more from it, it's inside the film, rather than, I think it's more a film that has space inside of it for you to move around and find things. It's not so much a film that opens itself out to things outside of it. Does that make sense? That's my feeling about it.
It does, but you need to be able to if you bring a kind of vague historical understanding, kind of the connections are made easier, right? Because, I think the thing about that sequence is, here's a couple, who survived concentration camps, and yet that rape broke the husband in a way, that he was internally intact. Yeah, so kind of that rape did something to him psychologically and as a person that actually the concentration camps hadn't been able to get through.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think kind of that's an interesting thing. And obviously the thing about being completely powerless, both of them, right, is that the film indicates a kind of an understanding and a forgiveness of whatever it is that they've done to survive where they are, which by implication is lots of horrible things, right? So kind of, and so all that dialogue which says, I know, I understand, I see you, I know everything you've done and I love you anyway, right? Like, I think that calls on a period of hopelessness of.
Yeah. It's also interesting that to sort of connect to that, there is something interesting about how Erzsébet has that sense of, there is a kind of metaphysical understanding of, we've had to do things that go beyond our marriage. This is about how two people whose lives are connected to each other have put up with and dealt with and managed things that have happened to them. I think that contrasts interestingly with the scene in the car, which we talked a little bit about earlier on, which is one of my favorite scenes in the film, where he absolutely loses it. I forget what's happened just before it, but that's where he really, his performance in that scene is so great, where he's saying, like, they don't want us here. Like, the reason we came here is because we had absolutely nowhere else to go, and they don't want us here. And she actually seems quite struck by that, and it's as if the hope that she had about being able to make it here is possibly seen, she might be starting to see it as a little bit naive, because he's been here a lot longer than her, and he does have an opinion that she trusts, and we can see why he feels the way he does, that, they really don't want him here. Harry, the son, says it outright to him that we tolerate you, which is as close as things get to saying, you're a toy, you're my dad's toy, and you're something he can flash about to his other wealthy guests.
It's funny though that he'll say and be absolutely clear about the fact they don't want us here, but when it comes to shall we move to Israel, he poo-poos that idea. He's so dismissive of it, which I found quite funny, just the way he did it. It's kind of a thing of his, he just with his hand, he sort of says, oh, come on, enough with this nonsense. Because he's also like, well, we fucking moved here and we're making a life for ourselves. And what have we come here for and built what we've built for? Just to leave it and move on to somewhere else? I have my life here. And why would I just give it up, even if they don't want me?
I think it's also something about, I do get the feeling he's a character that works well against intention, And I wonder if there's a sense of going to Israel is something that has been organized for you and is open for you.
But also
Whereas
Israel
in
in
the
those
States-
days, what was it? It was like, 5 sheep and...
Well, they did say,
the
yeah,
desert.
it's a difficult life there,
Yeah.
she says. Yeah.
So, but also, I think we're missing out her understanding because, his thing of they don't want us here, right? And her knowledge that, are you a fool? They don't want us anywhere. They just tried to kill all of us, right? Like, kind of, so kind of that they don't want us here shouldn't be a problem. I mean, sorry, it's not that it shouldn't be a problem, but that should be the base understanding. They don't want you here, right? But actually kind of being tolerated, being offered work, kind of they're living a much richer life than, 90% of the refugees in that period, right? Like, so you don't throw that. I mean, that is because he speaks about, I'm having a period of good fortune, right? And it's in the face of kind of all that happened, like in the previous 10, 15 years. And all the pogroms before that, right? Like, kind of, this is where Fiddler in the Roof comes in, right? Like, I mean, it is like kind of, they kick you from one bit of Eastern Europe to another, kind of. And actually, that's, I mean, I was reading about pogroms in Northern Ireland. I forget in relation to whom. Somebody who ended up in England because there was a pogrom in Northern Ireland, right? So, I mean, this is all the period leading up to the Second World War. So, for instance, they don't want us here? Like, what kind of a fool are you? Where do they want you? So, sorry, a very convoluted way of saying that you understand both of them. And actually, a kind of a historical understanding that makes you understand both of them also creates kind of this tension. Because you do understand both of them.
I want to talk about the look a little bit because we came down to see this in 70mm. So the film is shot in VistaVision, which is the 35mm process, and the films run through the camera sideways like it is with IMAX. 70mm done in IMAX. So it gives you a larger portion of the frame to work with. And from what I understand, the height of the frame is the same as regular 70mm. So that's why it's been printed on that process to see it. So the film is in... It's in widescreen, but it's 166:1, so it's not 185 or anything wider than that, and it's conspicuous the way it looks. What I've always been saying about 70mm, just personally, is I've seen a few things in it, and I've never felt like I've got the point of it or got the value of it that other people seem to. That people go really crazy over it. I get the value of IMAX completely. I love it. It's so crisp and beautiful and clear, and it's completely different. But I've never felt like I've seen and felt the difference between 70mm and 35mm in a DCP. You know what I mean? Like, I've never seen the added value of it. And I'd have to see a comparison, I guess, but I still feel like I don't quite get it here. Is it particularly clearer? Is it particularly brighter? It's a very beautiful looking film.
Not brighter, but definitely clearer, more detailed.
Yeah. I mean, it did feel detailed and clear, so, I've got to, maybe it would be conspicuously different on 35mm or on a DCP.
But I want to see The Master in 70mm.
So did I. I didn't get it.
I did. And it was in that big Odeon in Leicester Square.
That's where I saw it, yeah.
We didn't go together, did we?
No, we didn't, but I just saw it.
There was just something about the glow of the telephone. I remember, like, the telephone, these green rooms, right? Like, the celluloid had a softness, right? So kind of, it's not digital. It's kind of a soft grain, right? But also this glow of the color and this detail, right? Like, I think all those opening sequences where you just see the yellow flashes, right? Like, kind of, I mean, I think kind of they're beautiful, really. And I think those moments that we were describing earlier of the quarry, right? Kind of, I thought you saw gradations of, kind of color. I mean, obviously, without having a comparison.
Well, that's the question, really, is what do they look like side by side? Because you can't make that very clear. But
I thought this looked really, really beautiful and really detailed. So for me, it was worth it, actually.
Well, I did certainly think it looked incredibly beautiful. I mean, I think it is a beautifully shot film. The question becomes, how will it look on 35? Will I notice a difference? I don't know. So the question of, was it worth the trip for that? I don't know. But it's extremely beautiful looking. I think sunlight is used really beautifully well. There's something about, I don't know whether it's the quality of the film or whatever, but sunlight is so rich in this film. It particularly struck me when they were up on that crane. That's so bright and so crisp and clear. So I really felt, there was something particularly beautiful about the imagery there.
One of the differences, just to point out as well, that is, it's not just in printing and exhibition that there is a difference between VistaVision and standard 35mm. It's also to do with the fact that you're working on film sideways does mean that lenses work differently, and they I think it's the case that they effectively have it's as if they have a slightly different focal length, or at least they give you a different field of view.
Right.
So that does make a difference. It would be interesting to see if there was one. I'm sure there isn't, but if you could compare, say, the shot where Laszlo and Attila hug, and you see that bus in the background. I don't think you get, if that's on, say, a 40mm lens. A 40mm lens shooting on VistaVision, I think, gives you a wider field of view than it would on standard 35mm. So that's partly where the difference is, which I'm totally with you there, that I have a harder time seeing the difference between VistaVision and standard 35mm than I do 35mm and 70mm. But part of that is to do with clarity. But VistaVision is somewhere between the two, which is precisely why I think it's worth seeing this. I wanted to see this on 70mm because I am interested in how films look. And the way he wants you to see it, his ideal way of presenting it is 70mm, because effectively to show VistaVision on standard 35 or a DCP, you're sort of
shrinking,
you're down resing it. Whereas to print VistaVision up onto 70mm, you get everything that has been that has been exposed on the VistaVision negative.
Yeah, so like I say, what I was reading was saying that the height of the frame in VistaVision is the same as the height of a frame on regular 70mm. The width is different, but the height is, there's no such thing as resolution in film, but the height is giving you that same height.
You could look at it like one way that you might be able to start to see comparisons is you could always take something like a standard 35mm Hitchcock film and then compare it to North by Northwest and Vertigo, because those are VistaVision films.
Right.
So if you can find a good enough transfer that you can tell the difference, that might be one way of seeing the difference between the two.
There's one other thing on a technical aspect to talk about, which is AI. And this isn't to make a big point about this, but it is a kind of increasing thing. So the film has been criticised for the use of AI in two ways, because there are so many ways in which AI is such a blanket term. Like the ghosts in Pac-Man have AI, how they follow you, but no one calls that the end of civilization. So AI technology here has been used in augmenting the speech of the actors speaking Hungarian in minor ways to kind of correct vowels, and people have been saying that, don't we want the performance to shine through, right? If we're affecting them digitally, isn't that thing? Maybe it's a program called Respeech, I think, which has been used on The Mandalorian to recreate James Earl Jones' voice, I think, kind of post his death, which apparently Jones gave permission for them to do so. So obviously rights come into play and those things about it's not just in Respeech, but actors being kind of recreated from the dead has been a whole thing, particularly in Star Wars. The other thing is the use of generative AI, which is the particular kind of form of AI that is being really criticised, which is, the AI where you type in a prompt, you say, I want a picture of, a fish, and it will give you 5 different fishes, and it just comes out of nowhere, right? And that apparently has been used in a very limited way towards the end of the film here, when we're seeing that retrospective exhibition of Laszlo's career. There are one or two. They wanted to create, they said, images of what bad digital images would look like in the 80s. And apparently they used a generative AI system. Was it Midjourney, you said?
I think Midjourney.
Maybe Midjourney to do this. And it's in the background of a shot. And the point of bringing this up isn't to criticise this film in particular for being some bastion of, they should never have done, I think it's just to say that, it's clear that the dam has burst on this, right? You would expect the biggest productions, the Star Warses, to be using this for the suits, to be saying, this will cut costs, we can do it really easily, we can get rid of the creatives. But when it's the smaller productions, I mean, we can talk about how small this is, but apparently it cost $10 million. And one of the things is that everyone's been saying,
small.
It's amazing that this film was made for $10 million the way it looks. But it's a small production, right? And so when a small and independent production is doing this, and this is not the first to have used generative AI at all, it just kind of goes to show that the dam has burst on these things. And I guess the question with generative AI processes is that technology has been taking people's jobs forever. Films are not made the same way now that they were 100 years ago. Technology has changed and jobs have gone in doing so, right? Like autofocus or auto white balance or whatever. People that would be doing various jobs are no longer doing them because technology takes care of it. But also, you've needed then people to understand those new jobs and do the new job, take care of the new technology. And I think there is a qualitative difference with generative AI in that there is certainly a prevailing feeling that this is a bellwether moment, that we'll be able to do stuff that has no quality control and we can completely take away the jobs of people and take away real human creative input in doing so as well.
My understanding about the use of Midjourney to generate images is that it was used to generate images that were then adapted.
Yes, they made the point
by the production
in responding to this criticism. They said everything was hand-drawn, but generative AI had a role in making one or two images pre the final thing.
I mean, you can make this argument from the beginning of cinema. You can say, a machine is filming instead of it being painted. Right? Like,
it's also worth thinking about how this story came up and how it's why it's being shared the way that it is and who's sharing it, because it is something that's coming up mid-Oscar race. It's interesting that the story didn't come up by somebody doing a lot of digging and pointing out, you lied about this. The editor spoke about it very openly in an interview, volunteered this.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting that filmmakers in general have not been particularly negative about any of this stuff. They are very much of the, you read their comments about generative processes, they are very much of the, I wonder what we can do with this school, as opposed to, I'm worried about the impact it will have and so on. So there is that.
Every change in technology brings up these questions, and I think every generation of filmmakers or artists kind of demonstrates that it's a tool that artists use in different ways. Now, historically, a Hollywood A film might require 300 people or something. So now in the future, it might require 20. But I can't see any work being made without human intervention. I think, there's kind of scaremongering around all of that. Yeah. We don't write in the same way. Yeah. We don't read in the same way. Like all these technologies have completely affected and altered, the way we do all of these things. I don't see kind of, why AI in relation to film would be any different. It is kind of a big change. It'll have large effects. Some of them will be negative for sure. But actually, I can't imagine that you'll be able to create a television show, say, with no human intervention that people will watch for any length of time. I just can't imagine that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do see, though, that it's an interesting, I don't know very much about it, but it is an interesting part of the whole brutalist thing that's worth thinking about and looking more into the longer that you live with the film, because yes, I can see the sort of simple logic of attacking it for, this is a film about the human impulse to create. So why would you put all that work into shooting it on film and managing to get the $10 million to put this thing together and rebuilding the VistaVision process? Because I think it's the first film that's been completely shot on VistaVision in 45 years.
Right.
And so why would you, it's also, it's interested enough in format that I love that it has this kind of perverse quality at the end that you're shooting on high 8 video that you're then printing onto 70mm. I like that he's a filmmaker that's interested in this. And I can see that it seems like a strange gap in that you would then use AI, because we think of AI as, well, it's doing all the work. And I don't think it's quite that simple.
No.
I think it may well be that what's happened here are processes which are not the dam bursting. It may be that it's being labeled as AI, but it's using technology that's been used in post-production work for years. Midjourney, I grant you, is new, but something like Respeecher may just be another software that is doing exactly the same thing.
Well, that's why I drew
editors have been doing.
That's why I drew a difference between the two. Yeah, but I agree. I need there's a certain degree of your own personal sort of level of outrage, or what you think is allowable and what isn't, and that sort of thing.
I mean,
and also talking about the story in a way that is somewhat kind of a Harvey Weinstein tactic during the Oscar race, which is that, Adrian Brody seems to be the front runner for Best Actor. How can we get Chalamet, who practiced for 5 years to sing like Bob Dylan? Well, we say that Adrian Brody isn't actually performing here. A computer did it.
It was used in the Monkey movie, I think, to help Robbie Williams' voice.
Well, I mean, I think you know.
Well, it seems, speaking of the monkey movie thing, that
You got to stop talking about the monkey movie
no, the monkey
in
movie.
every podcast.
No, I don't think I can stop. But it was specifically compared to this when it came out in America, because people were speaking about how this cost an 11th of what that film cost, and they both made about the same amount of money in the first weekend. This made, I think, $1.3 million, and that made 1.1. It made less, and so people were really heavily mocking the monkey movie for that. But but they had a monkey in that one. So.
Did the monkey survive the Holocaust?
It didn't, but it survived
the pop band.
It survived a lot else. Whatever we see next, I will continue to find a reason to mention the monkey movie. So
Do you prefer the monkey movie to the Brutalist?
I actually think that I prefer this to the monkey movie, which I know is blasphemy, and I'll get hate from all of the Robbie stans. But I love the monkey movie still. But I do
It's
like
funny
this.
that you're calling it the monkey movie in spite of the fact that what we've said 3 times in the last 24 hours about it is you totally forget that it's a monkey.
You do forget he's a monkey. It's amazing. But and it's been nominated for effects. Mind you, this has been nominated for 10 Oscars.
I'm all for Adrian. I don't know if I've seen everybody that's up for Best Actor, but I thought Adrian Brody was so great in
Yes,
this.
so great.
And Guy Pearce too. Guy Pearce is really...
Guy Pearce has he been nominated?
Yeah,
He
so
deserves
let me
an
read them
Oscar.
out. This has been nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Adrian Brody, Best Supporting Actor, Guy Pearce,
Guy Pearce should get it.
Best Supporting Actress, Felicity Jones, Best Original Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Production Design.
Best Original Score also worth pointing out just for the sake of filling in Brady Corbet knowledge. So this is dedicated to, or it's in the memory of Scott Walker. It's the first thing you see in the credits. One of the reasons, again, that I found out about Brady Corbet making films is that I'm a big Scott Walker fan, and he's written 3 scores. I think he wrote one for Leos Carax in the late 90s, and then he did the 2 scores for Brady Corbet's first 2 films. And you can absolutely see that in the way that he makes films, the way he's directed them, and as well as his interests, why he and Scott Walker kind of line up. Daniel Blumberg, or Bloomberg, who's written the score for this, I think he works with Peter Walsh, who's Scott Walker's producer, was Scott Walker's producer. But I would totally recommend you watch those first 2 films, or if nothing else, just listen to the scores, because Scott Walker has a great sense of, he's dynamic in the way that I think Brady Corbet is also dynamic. He's got a real sense of loud and quiet and large and small and kind of bombast and scale. His scores for those first 2 films are really, really great and really striking. And you can see how Daniel Blumberg has sort of, he has similarities to that, but this is very much his own thing. And again, Scott Walker is kind of strange and interesting and shares interest with Brady Corbet, because after he was a crooner and very modernist, making sort of pop music in the 60s, in the 80s, 90s and 2000s, he would make pretty much one album every decade, and they're very strange, very abstract. And he wrote songs like about Ceausescu, and he wrote a 16-minute love song about Mussolini's girlfriend. So you can totally see why Brady Corbet, you're very envious of Brady Corbet just coming forward with a script like Childhood of a Leader and going, are you interested? And Scott Walker writes this absolute knockout score for it.
There's one more thing I want to ask, which is, do you think Brady Corbet, or Corbet as I call him, does things for effect?
Brady Corbet.
Do you think he does things for effect? Because this is how I responded to the very end of the film. The song coming up, which I was saying was kind of goofy and poppy, and to me, I remember the ending of Smile had a similar thing where it kind of ends in this, Smile ends in an extremely bleak, horrible way, and then it goes lollipop, lollipop. So it's like, it's a real fuck you kind of, I can choose a goofy song for the end of my film. This isn't quite that much of a shift, but there's still a shift in choosing something that's kind of goofy and upbeat, and then the credits are presented in this 45-degree angle, funny way. The opening credits, similarly, are presented in an odd way, which I don't think it's meant as like a fuck you, I think that's way too harsh, but there is something that feels, like I say, kind of goofy and for effect slightly, slightly unmotivated maybe.
I know exactly what you mean, and I think of it as a very interesting part of following Brady Corbet's career, because it does feel sometimes to me, not rarely, quite often, that I don't know if the project of his film or films I don't know if the project is to make me feel like this is important, or if it's doing something that he's interested in and it's becoming important. It's almost like you pointed out on the podcast before, you introduced me to this concept of termite art versus white elephant, and thinking about which one of these he is, or when the film is more of a termite and more white elephant, is really kind of interesting. I think the end of the film is a good example of this, because I think it's a genuinely interesting choice. I think it feels like it is aware of how jarring it is. But I also think it has an effect that is worth aiming at, and I don't think it's purely self-conscious. Although I can tell other films and other choices that it feels like it might be in reference to or in the tradition of, which are also effective and potentially more effective. You talked about Transit. I mentioned this earlier on, the Christian Petzold film, which makes pretty much one music choice, and it's in the credits where it has Talking Heads' Road to Nowhere, which is not jarring in the way that this disco track is at the end of The Brutalist. But then the whole style of Transit is very, very different and much more subtle than The Brutalist. But I think it's doing the same kind of thing, which is that odd kind of contrapuntal music choice. This is much more similar to the choice of using that Brahms at the end of There Will Be Blood, which is like a sort of satanic banquet sound that after you've watched this murder scene, it goes into this really bright, really strange, very sort of Kubrick-styled, jarring moment. I think he is doing that, but I also think his heart's in it. But I also don't know that I don't know how complicated the effect of that is.
I think of it always in relation to what would be alternative choices. Yeah. And I think, the whole of the last scene could really sink the film, because it really goes into cathartic, lachrymose kind of territory, basically. Right. And if you end this film on that kind of note, you damage the film. So I think kind of, the choice of music is a way of managing that potential sentimentality. And
the film has had a thread of goofiness throughout. It has a really good sense of humour. It has really funny writing, and people will say goofy things to each other. We've talked about, before the podcast, we were talking about one or two lines where, he says,
what a poetic answer.
Yeah, what a poetic answer. When we were laughing at everything he said, and it's so built into the lines that he says. The thing about Laszlo saying to the crap architect, quote unquote, that he talks to him privately, I need to address you. Everything that is ugly and crude and stupid, but most importantly ugly, is your fault. And it takes a long time to say it, and it takes ages for the punchline to come out, and you don't know if he's going to be making a serious point or not. It's wonderful, and it's really, really funny. And then, that scene finishes off with him, because it all kicks off, and then he says to Guy Pearce, he is a fucking idiot, though. He keeps on going with it. It has a real streak of that, and I think it's one I really appreciate. I mean, it's so easy for a film that has this kind of project going on to be so self-serious, and it absolutely isn't. It knows how to be light as well.
The one wrong note for me, well, wrong on one level, but I mean, the whole scene works and it's wonderful and so on, but the scene where he's getting a hand job at the beginning of the film, and the camera pans across his body, right? He's got this amazing body. It's all like these pecs, these ribs, these veins on his loins. And you think, you've just come out of a concentration camp.
Persecution.
Right? Yes. I mean, I thought that was the one moment that I thought,
Yeah.
That's just envy. I thought
a concentration camp was not a fat farm or yeah, kind of. Yeah.
There is one more thing I want to bring up that I really appreciate about the film, which we haven't mentioned. That's the camera work. There's a lot of long take, a lot of scenes being shot in one-ers that are sometimes they move a lot. So it's not just like a character. You get shots which are like in the bread line, for instance, the camera just pans or tracks from left to right, and it takes a long time. And it's like, we don't need to do all of this stuff in multiple takes. We can do this in one, and it looks interesting. But then there's when the wife confronts Guy Pearce at the end, and from the time she walks into that room to the time the kid kicks off trying to find the dad, that's all in one take, and the camera's moved in and out and up the stairs and back around and down again, and it's so smooth and beautiful. I don't think there are many shots, because a long take can be a show-off thing, and it can be an efficient thing. And I think more of the shots in here come down the efficient route. What I was saying about things being done for effect. Well, if he was doing things for effect, he would be showing off a lot more with those movements. He'd be making you notice them more. I think you really don't. I mean, I did notice them. I was looking for them, and I did appreciate how they were working. But I think there's a real kind of aesthetic intention behind them to let things play out and to see performances in full and that sort of thing, and to make the camera kind of a character's too much, but it's an active sort of, it's an active part of what we're seeing, right? Obviously,
yeah, it's really, really being thought about. It's interesting. The long take at the end, the one you pointed out, where Erzsébet comes in and makes the accusation that she does, is the one that I'm most ambivalent about. But I think I'm ambivalent about it because I don't know that it has the effect that it could have. I don't know that the scene has the effect that it might have or is trying to have. But I can also see theoretically why you would run that in a long take in the half of the film that has all these sequences that are quite disrupted by cuts, which is as if we're with Laszlo and his subjectivity is kind of collapsing a little bit, whereas she is absolutely iron in her will and her conviction that I'm going to come here and say what I'm going to say, and you can do whatever you want to do to me, and it will, what does she say? You're not excused. So that's a case where I find theoretically it works, but I don't know that the scene actually works as effectively as it might.
Sure. Well, no, I think I brought that scene up because it's like the most recent one in my memory because it's at the end of the film. Yeah,
and it's also the most noticeable. I think
you're probably right. Yeah.
Because you notice moving around into that profile of her and then moving all the way across and it is one of those long takes where it's horrible to look at films like this, but that thought does sometimes go through your head of, I wonder if you're trying to impress with this, because would that not work perfectly well without with a cut? And am I distracted by seeing how long it's taken us to move from one position to another? That problem, which is not rife, but I found the same thing pop up in films that have been designed in long takes, like The Revenant and 1917. I find very often that's an issue of deciding this whole thing is a long take. I spend a lot of time just panning across the space between two actors, and I need a cut. There's nothing wrong with cutting here.
No, sure. Well, and in fact, you get it when Guy Pearce is speaking to Laszlo at the party, invites him to it first, and he tells that long story. I can't remember anything about the story really, but he tells this very long story, and that is essentially in a long take. But there are one or two cuts to Adrian Brody's response. There's
actually a lot of cuts.
Right.
There's a lot of cuts, and there's a lot of cuts to other people. It's something, again, that happens more in the first half than the second, is that you're given pieces of the wider world. There's a lovely sequence early on when Laszlo's on a bus, when you just see 5 or 6 people's hands, and obviously what they're wearing and the handbags that they've got. And it's a lovely way of kind of expanding the sense of time and place. During that scene, you're both cutting to Laszlo, but you're also seeing other people at the party smoking and drinking. That's great, that story. The story that is all about, that's a really great kind of central scene about Laszlo figuring out, you're watching him figure out, I know how to talk to this guy in order to have him finance my work, and he seems susceptible, and I can talk about, is there a better way of describing than a cube, than its construction, and you're trying to get this slightly simple guy to basically say, that sounds very poetic, I really appreciate it.
Which he does.
And the story he's telling is incredibly indicative of who we sort of already know him to be, and it sets up how we see him later on, which is I was just about convinced that I should give members of my family, who were unpleasant to my mother, but extended members of my family, some of my fortune which I made. And ultimately I decided, fuck them. And he thinks that's a way of proving how much he loves his mother, but it's really resentful and incredibly kind of miserly, and as much as you understand. And punitive.
So the offer goes from 25,000 to making them feel grateful that they've received 500.
Yeah. It goes from 25,000, sneakily not really giving it to them by not signing it. They notice early on that the check's not signed, at which point he decides, I'll just tell them what I was doing. I was going to do this quietly and resentfully, and now I'll just tell them outright. And then, they end up getting $500. And the way that it's framed is, that's how much I love my mother. Like, you have no idea how you come across here. You could go on about this film. Go on. You
Well,
could
I
talk
mean,
about
look,
this
need
film
to
for a
wrap up.
very
If
long
we
time.
talk for 2 more hours, then it will be as long as the film.
Well,
I think you could talk for a long time about it.
I mean, my experience throughout the film was I'm really enjoying this, and I think it's so interesting. And every scene is interesting, and every little bit of character work is interesting, and every moment-to-moment thing was interesting. Even though, as I said, I thought the second half started to lull for me, but that's just like in nature. I think it's a deliberate thing, right? We're full of energy at the first half, the second half we're doing something different. And it's not like a problem that I have with the film. But I was thinking, like, I'm not adding it up together. Like, is it as rich as all this? And then, in conversation, it is.
it becomes even richer, I think.
So yeah. I mean, because when you started off, Jose, going, I think this is the film of the year, and I was thinking, okay, what has he got out of this that I haven't? But now I've got it now. I've heard it. Right? Like it is good.
There is also just something to a film that is as big as it is, and that it takes talking about it and sleeping on it, and it comes back to you after the fact. Because where you end up is so far away from where you started. I think it just takes time to digest.
Also, on a feeling level, right, as an experience. I mean, I saw the Dylan film, and I felt it was like 3 hours long instead of 2 hours and 20 minutes or whatever it was, which is the opposite to what a lot of my friends thought. But this, I thought it moved. I never once looked at my watch. I wasn't even paying that much attention to actually the use of the shots that you were just talking about, because I was just so involved in the story and the themes and kind of what was being narrated and the drama of it. Yeah, that I didn't pay attention to the time, and I didn't pay attention to the shots, actually. Kind of, I was just involved in the world and the people that was created. So, to me, that is like a tremendous accomplishment in a film of this length in particular.
My experience was kind of inverted, because I was so involved in looking at the filmmaking and looking at those shots and following the characters and everything. But I was thinking, I'm not thinking about themes here, man. I'm not thinking about what it all means. How am I going to talk about this? And so luckily you guys took up the slack, so well done.
I think he's going to be, I hope he gets to keep making films, because I really very much think of this as a film that will get even more interesting as time goes by, and particularly if and when he directs more films. I think it's one of those things that will become more interesting in retrospect, when you know more and more what he's interested in and what in the sort of fullness of time his career goes on to be about. I think of it. I really do think of this as like, it's interesting. These are sort of his first 3 films, and this is a major step up, and absolutely my favorite of the 3. And I'm really curious to see what else he does.
I think it feels like a truly great film.
Cool. So let's wrap up. Cheers. Thank you, Stephen,
My pleasure.
for joining us. Thank you for inviting us down.
Yeah, thank you all very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and YouTube Music. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I've just listened to so much of this.
All right.
When we did it with Paul for Napoleon, he was like, "Oh, I got to see the bit where you say all the stuff, and I didn't realise you weren't reading it out."
I liked him. He was really funny. It was great, like hearing him on that one, where he was like, "Well, it's because he's the expert on Napoleon and Napoleon in film." Well, next time there's the new P.T. Anderson is VistaVision, so if they show that at the IMAX, because I think it's coming out on IMAX.
Let's hope it's at IMAX, because it's not worth seeing it on a smallish screen.
It is coming out in IMAX.
Yeah.
And look, NFT 3 was nice, and you were saying it's so renovated and beautiful and everything. But I'm not coming down there again to see a 70mm film. It's just not worth it. Sure. If I'm coming down, it's got to be at the IMAX,
But no, if it's at the Cinema 1, it would be fine.
Oh, right, sure,
but I think, if you're advertising 70mm, you want to see it big.
Yeah. I want it to be more of an event than it was.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I thought it looked... I saw the 70mm print. Might have been the same print, might have been a different one, I don't know. But when I saw it in NFT 1, it looked better today than it did in NFT 1.
Well, I mean,
but that could also be where I was sat.
But I think, I mean, one thing you were saying, about blowing up and shrinking down, one thing that you get when you shrink down a high quality image is effectively increased resolution. Things look sharp, and you get it with digital filming an awful lot, because there are details that the way that digital images are stored, some things are some details are sort of spread out, 422, that thing, depending on how much detail you save initially. But basically, when you compress digital images down into low resolution ones, you can save more quote unquote high resolution information and get a really good looking low resolution image, as it were. So you effectively get the same thing when you're showing a very high resolution or high grain film image on a small screen. You'll look incredibly sharp, but then it's on a small screen.
Yeah. No, I
want it to be big.
I'm sure that this will. I'm sure that they'll scan this in for the Blu-ray or whatever it is, like 6K or something at least, and I'm sure it will look great. And I know that part of me will go, this looks better than it did in the cinema because of sharpness, because of flicker. Even though I also like going to see prints because it's got the film softness and the flicker, as well as the fact that like the texture of the whole thing is very different. I don't like that I'm so used to DCPs that when I have seen prints of films in recent years, I've felt frustrated by, it's not as perfect looking, because I don't like the idea of film not looking amazing. And I wonder whether or not I don't remember exactly how film looked when it was the standard. And then I just got used to DCPs, which can look fantastic. As long as the bulb's bright enough, they look like they glow.
Yeah. Well, the standard can be higher because you can get very low quality film prints.
And again, the thing is to compare. It's like I've only ever seen The Master at the cinema on 70mm.
Yeah.
I think I saw it 3 times when it was first released, and I may have seen it a couple of times since. I've never seen a DCP of it at the cinema, but I've seen the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray looks amazing, but I don't know, it's difficult when you want to be very pro-film, not anti-digital, but I love film. But it is kind of...
Projectionist as well.
There is also the projectionist, exactly.
The print.
Yeah.
There's,
So
people...
many variables.
Yes.
There was a reason why, like when I first started going out to the films, you always went on the first weekend.
Right. Yes, yeah, because been run to pieces.
Well, there was the excitement of the audience and the queuing and everything. But then by the third week, the print would look like a 3-week-old print. Yeah, that had been shown a lot of times.
Which was the first thing I thought when there was part of me in November that went, it's not like The Master looked. And I'm going, is this one of 6 prints that's been available? And the fact is, this has been on the festival circuit for a little while. So am I just not watching? What I want to see an absolutely fresh print?
Well,
Is it a shame that we don't get to see Jeanne Dielman next weekend? Because I think that's the first time they're running a brand new print of it at the BFI.
The person who introduced
How much do we like My Friend Whose Birthday It Is? It's that, or it's Jeanne Dielman on 35.
The lady who introduced the film thanked... Who did she thank? Was it Universal for the loan of the prints, right? Yeah. And you could see from the prints a scratch here and there and a blemish because it's been run a few times already. And that, that just helps kind of, enliven it more. I mean, the whole thing with that film, The Afterlight, was about, we're going to run this until it dies. And although, of course, they actually just lost it.
They found it again.
Well, I've seen some prints of the Charles, which were just terrible. They'd all gone to red. Like, they're not afraid of showing those 1970s Kodak.
Yeah.
They've got
a print. They've run Salo about 3 times in the last few months, and I've not gone to see it yet, but I would love to see it on a print just to see how that looks, having not seen it in about 12 years.
You've talked about when you've rented films to show at Warwick.
Yeah.
You can't, if you rent musicals, sections will have been cut out by someone.
There are a lot of Fred Astaire films, Swing Time. I think when we showed it maybe to you, in fact, right? The number at the end was jumpy. And the reason it was jumpy is because people had cut out frames. I mean, that is what
2001, I think that happens quite often.
Yeah.
Like people to steal frames.
I think no one noticed this.
Nobody adds stuff in.
Yeah,
nobody sticks stuff in like.
I think there are incidents of people adding stuff in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was this subliminal advertising tests of people adding things onto the print and then seeing how it affected people. And I think some of it was actually about consumption. Like, I don't know, aren't hot dogs delicious?
Oh, right.
They're available at the intermission or whatever. So there have been incidents of people adding things in. I mean, I'd have to look it up to be more precise, but yes.
Well, it's a joke in Fight Club, isn't it? That Tyler sneaks pictures of porn into family films.
Right.
So they just flash at people.
Right.
There is a thing about Sound of Music. Was it in Italy? that some exhibitors show Sound of Music, but to get more screenings in, they cut out all the musical numbers.
Oh God.
It's just a dry film.